I don't know how to explain what happened that weekend. I don't even know if I'll ever be able to process it completely. But I do know that I will never go back to that place. I had been looking forward to the trip for weeks. A long weekend alone in the woods, just me and nature. I had rented a small, off-the-grid cabin deep in the mountains. No electricity, no cell service, just a wood stove and a small generator in case of emergencies. That's exactly what I wanted. No distractions, no noise, just peace. I packed enough food to last 4 days, loaded up my truck, and headed out early Friday morning. The drive up was peaceful at first. The roads wound through the trees, the air crisp and fresh. The deeper I got into the mountains, the fewer cars I saw. The last 40 miles were on an old dirt road, rough and uneven. My truck handled it fine, but I noticed how quickly I was leaving civilization behind. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was already starting to set behind the trees. The place was exactly as described: small, sturdy, and isolated. A single-room cabin with a loft for sleeping, a wood-burning stove, a tiny kitchen, and a front porch that overlooked a clearing. The trees stood tall around it, thick and dense, pressing in on all sides. I unloaded my supplies, set up my sleeping bag in the loft, and started a fire in the stove. The temperature was dropping fast, and I knew it would get cold at night. The quiet was overwhelming at first. I wasn't used to it. No distant hum of cars, no buzzing streetlights, no voices. Just the crackling fire and the wind moving through the trees. That first night, I slept fine. It was the second night when things started to feel off. I had spent the day hiking and fishing, enjoying the solitude. By the time I got back to the cabin, I was tired and hungry. I made dinner, read for a while by lantern light, and turned in early. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. The fire had burned down to embers, and the room was cold. But it wasn't the cold that had woken me. It was the sound. At first, I thought it was the wind. But as I lay there, holding my breath, I realized it was something else. It was a slow, deliberate creaking, like footsteps on wood. My heart started pounding. I told myself it was just the cabin settling, just the old wood shifting as the temperature dropped. But then it happened again. A soft, dragging sound, followed by another creak, came from the front porch. I stayed completely still, listening. The sound stopped, and the silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me. Eventually, I must have fallen back asleep because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through the small window, and everything looked normal. I went outside, my breath clouding in the crisp air. The porch was empty. No footprints, no signs of anything unusual. I told myself it had just been my imagination. The third night, I knew it wasn't. Started the same way. I fell asleep easily, exhausted from another long hike. But sometime in the early hours of the morning, I woke up again. This time, there was no mistaking it. Something was outside. I heard it moving through the trees, slow and careful. Not an animal, something heavier. My skin prickled, every muscle in my body tensing. I lay there, straining to hear. The footsteps stopped just outside the cabin. And then, a soft tap against the window. Just once. Light, almost delicate. Then silence. I didn't move. I barely breathed. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. An animal? A tree branch? My own paranoia? Then came another tap. I gripped the handle of my knife, my palms slick with sweat. I didn't know what to do. If I made a noise, would it go away? Or would it try to come in? Minutes passed, maybe hours. Eventually, the first hints of dawn crept through the trees, and the feeling of being watched slowly faded. When I finally got the courage to move, I climbed down from the loft and peered out the window. Nothing. I stepped outside, my boots crunching on the frosty ground. There were footprints, not mine. They circled the cabin, stopping at the windows, the door, the porch. They were deep, heavy. Someone had been here, walking in slow, deliberate loops. I packed my things in record time. I didn't care that I had one more night left. I didn't care that I had planned for 4 days. I threw everything into my truck and didn't look back. The drive down that mountain felt longer than the way up. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I expected to see someone standing in the trees, watching me leave. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the endless forest. I don't know who or what was out there that night. I don't want to know. I'll never go back to that cabin, and I will never go camping alone again. I never liked cabins. Something about being in the middle of the woods, away from everything, made me uneasy. But when my brother, Jake, invited me up to the one he had just bought, I couldn't say no. He had been talking about getting a place for years, somewhere quiet, somewhere he could escape the stress of city life. And now he finally had it. A small, old cabin deep in the woods of northern Michigan. He wanted me to come up for the weekend, help him settle in, maybe go fishing like we used to when we were kids. It sounded simple enough. I packed my truck with a duffel bag, some snacks, and a case of beer, then started the long drive north. The roads got worse the deeper I went into the woods. First, they turned to gravel, then to dirt, full of potholes and loose rocks. My GPS stopped working miles before I reached the turnoff, leaving me to rely on the directions Jake had texted me. I found the driveway easily enough, just a narrow path cutting through thick trees. I followed it slowly, my tires crunching over twigs and dead leaves. The cabin sat at the end of the path, smaller than I expected, with dark wood siding and a sagging porch. Jake's truck was parked out front, but I didn't see him. I got out and stretched my legs. The air smelled like damp earth and pine. It was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no birds, just the faint hum of insects somewhere in the distance. I walked up to the porch and knocked on the door. No answer. "Jake," I called, pushing the door open. The inside was as simple as I expected. Just one big room with a couch, a small kitchen, and a door leading to what I assumed was the bedroom. There were boxes stacked against the walls, some open, some still taped shut. The air inside smelled stale, like old wood and dust. I checked my phone, no service. Great. I figured Jake must have gone out, maybe exploring or fishing. He'd probably be back soon. I grabbed a beer from my bag, sat down on the couch, and waited. An hour passed, then two. It was getting dark. The trees outside turned to black silhouettes against the last bit of light. I started to feel uneasy. Jake wouldn't just leave without telling me. I grabbed a flashlight from my truck and decided to look around. The woods were dense, the ground uneven with roots and fallen branches. I called Jake's name, but my voice just seemed to disappear into the trees. Then I saw something, about 50 yards from the cabin, barely visible through the trees. A shape, dark, unmoving. I walked closer, my flashlight shaking in my hand. It was a tent, old, weathered, collapsed in on itself like it hadn't been touched in years. But there were footprints in the dirt around it, fresh ones. I swallowed hard and stepped closer. The tent was partially unzipped. I reached down, pulled it open. Inside was a sleeping bag, flattened and dirty, a small camping stove, a plastic water bottle covered in mold, and a notebook. I picked it up. The cover was soft, almost falling apart. I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling. The writing was messy, frantic. Page after page of notes, sketches, numbers. Some of it looked like journal entries, others like calculations. Then I saw Jake's name. My breath caught in my throat. Met a man named Jake today. Said he bought the cabin. He doesn't know yet. Didn't know what? I flipped ahead. He should leave. If he doesn't, I don't know what I'll do. I dropped the notebook. My chest felt tight. Someone had been watching my brother, threatening him. I turned back toward the cabin, moving fast. I needed to get out of there. I needed to find Jake and leave. But then I heard something, a rustling sound behind me. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Nothing. Then I heard it again. Closer. I ran, back through the trees, back to the cabin. I slammed the door behind me and locked it. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. The cabin felt different now. I grabbed my keys, ready to run to my truck, But then I saw something on the table. Another notebook, just like the one in the tent. I picked it up, my hands shaking. The last page had only one line. He should have left. I didn't hear the footsteps until they were right outside the door. I had always wanted to get away for a weekend, just to be alone in the woods. No phone buzzing, no emails, no city noise. Just me, a small rented cabin, and nature. Sounded peaceful. The drive was long, taking me deeper into the forest. The road turned from pavement to gravel, then dirt. My truck rumbled over potholes as I followed the GPS signal that flickered in and out. Eventually, I reached a small clearing where the cabin sat, surrounded by thick trees. It looked old but sturdy. The wooden steps creaked as I climbed up to the porch. A single rocking chair sat outside, still as the air around me. Inside, it was exactly as the rental site described. Small, simple, and quiet. A kitchen with an old stove and fridge, a tiny table with 2 chairs, and a living area with a couch and a wood-burning stove. The bedroom had a single bed and a window overlooking the trees. The bathroom was basic, just a toilet, sink, and shower stall. Smelled like wood and dust. I unloaded my bags, placing them in the bedroom. The silence in the cabin was deep. No distant hum of traffic, no voices, not even birds chirping. Just silence. I tried to shake off the strange feeling settling in my chest. I had wanted peace and quiet. This was it. I spent the first evening chopping some firewood, enjoying the fresh air. The forest felt dense, the trees packed tightly together. Every so often, I thought I heard something, a faint rustle or snap, but I figured it was just small animals moving through the underbrush. I tried not to let my mind wander. That night, I locked the doors and settled in with a book. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows across the wooden walls. At some point, I dozed off on the couch. I woke up suddenly. The fire was low, barely glowing. I sat up, rubbing my face. Something felt off. The cabin was too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I listened, but there was nothing, just my own breathing. Still, I felt watched. I shook my head, forcing a laugh. "You're being paranoid," I muttered to myself. I stirred the fire, added more wood, and checked the locks before heading to bed. Sleep was restless. I kept waking up, my ears straining for sounds that weren't there. Once, I swore I heard something outside, a soft crunch of leaves. But when I looked out the window, the darkness was impenetrable. Morning came, gray and cold. I made coffee and went outside to get more firewood. That's when I noticed something strange. There were prints in the dirt near the tree line. Not animal tracks, they were footprints, barefoot, human. They led from the trees to the cabin's porch. But there were no prints leading away. My stomach turned. I scanned the woods, my heartbeat in my throat. The prints looked fresh. I hadn't heard anything in the night, at least I didn't think I had. Maybe I'd imagined the noise. Maybe I hadn't. I went back inside and locked the door. I told myself it could have been a hiker. But why barefoot? And why walk right up to the porch and not leave? I tried to shake it off. I wasn't going to let some weird footprints ruin my trip. The second night, I couldn't relax. Every sound made my nerves jump. The wind groaned through the trees, branches scraping against each other like whispers. The fire felt too dim, the walls too thin. Then, late at night, I heard it. A soft tap. Not on the door. On the window. I froze. The sound was light, deliberate. I turned my head slowly. The curtains were drawn. My throat tightened. I waited, barely breathing. Another tap. I forced myself to move, standing up as quietly as possible. My pulse pounded in my ears. I reached for the fireplace poker, gripping it tight. The tapping stopped. I stood there for what felt like hours. I didn't check the window. I didn't want to see what was out there. Eventually, the fire burned low, and exhaustion took over. I sat back down, never letting go of the poker. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When it did, I checked outside. Nothing. No prints, no signs that anyone had been near the window. but I knew what I heard. I packed my things. As I loaded the truck, I glanced at the tree line. For a second, I thought I saw movement, a shift between the trunks, a figure standing just beyond the trees. I didn't stay to find out. I got in my truck and drove, leaving the cabin and whatever had been watching me behind. I never looked back. I don't know why I went back to that cabin. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was just plain stupidity. I told myself it was unfinished business, that I needed to prove to myself that nothing had happened there. But I knew the truth. I was chasing the feeling, that deep, stomach-churning unease that had crept up my spine the first time I was there. I had to face it. The cabin belonged to my uncle before he died. He used to talk about it like it was paradise. Secluded, peaceful, a place where the air was cleaner, where the stars looked brighter. But when he passed, no one wanted it. My mom said it had bad energy. My dad, a man who never believed in anything he couldn't see, refused to stay the night there, so it sat untouched for years. I should have left it alone. The first time I stayed there, nothing happened, or at least nothing I could explain. I spent a weekend alone, cleaning, taking inventory of what had been left behind. It was normal. I slept fine, ate fine, but something about the place just felt off, like the air was too thick, like the trees pressed in too close. It was too quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that made you feel watched. I left that Sunday, and for weeks, I had the same dream. Standing at the cabin window, staring out at the dark tree line, something just beyond the edge of sight watching back. So I went back. I had to prove to myself that it was just in my head, that I wasn't scared of an empty cabin. The drive up was uneventful, just miles of twisting back roads, the pavement cracking, the forest swallowing the light the farther I went. I got there around noon, parked out front. The place looked the same, small, weathered wood, a porch that sagged just enough to make me hesitate before stepping on it. The lock was stiff, but the door pushed open with a groan that set my teeth on edge. Inside, everything was just how I left it. A thin layer of dust settled on the counters, but nothing looked disturbed. The same old furniture, the same ugly plaid couch, the same scent of old wood and something stale underneath. I dropped my bag by the couch and started unpacking. The first night was fine. I kept the lights on longer than I usually would, but nothing felt too wrong. I heard some noises outside, but it was just the wind, branches scraping against the roof. I slept with my knife next to me anyway. The second night, things got worse. I spent most of the day outside, trying to ignore the feeling in my stomach. The feeling that I wasn't supposed to be there. The trees were too still, the wind too quiet. No birds, no rustling, just silence. I kept checking behind me, expecting to see something there, but there was never anything. That night, I locked up tight, checked the windows twice. I sat on the couch, staring at the TV that didn't work, listening. The cabin creaked the way old buildings do, but then there was something else. A sound I couldn't explain. It started as a soft thump, like something heavy dropping outside. Then another, closer. My hands clenched around the blanket. I told myself it was a deer, a raccoon, something normal. I stayed still, barely breathing. Then the doorknob rattled. Not the wind, not an animal. Something trying the lock. My stomach dropped. I didn't move. I stared at the door, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The rattling stopped. Then came slow, deliberate footsteps across the porch. I reached for my knife. My hands were shaking. I stood, creeping toward the window. Just a quick look, just to prove to myself that no one was there. I peeked through the curtain. Nothing. But I knew. I knew someone was out there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, gripping the knife, waiting. The noises didn't come back, but I could feel it. That heaviness in the air, that pressure on my chest like something was watching, waiting. By dawn, I'd convinced myself to leave. I packed up fast, barely bothering to fold my clothes, just shoving everything into my bag. My hands still shook. I didn't look out the window again. I grabbed my keys, opened the door, and stopped. Something was wrong. The air outside felt thick, heavy. And then I saw it. The footprints, leading from the tree line to the porch. Deep, deliberate prints in the damp earth. And next to them, another set, smaller. I turned, locked the door behind me, and walked to my car without looking back. I didn't breathe until I was halfway down the road. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. I never told anyone, never went back. The cabin is still there, still sitting in the woods, waiting. But I know now, I wasn't alone that night, and whoever was out there, they were waiting too. I had always wanted to spend time alone in a cabin. Away from everything, no traffic, no noise, no people. Just me and the quiet. I found a listing online for a small off-grid place deep in the mountains. The pictures showed a sturdy wooden cabin with a stone fireplace, a little porch, and nothing but trees in every direction. It looked perfect. The drive took most of the day. The road narrowed the farther I went, twisting through thick forest until it became a single dirt path. The last mile or so, I had to take it slow, my tires kicking up dust and small rocks. By the time I pulled up to the cabin, the sun had already started dipping behind the trees. It was exactly as the pictures showed. A single-room cabin, just big enough for a bed, a table, and a fireplace. There was no electricity, no running water, just a wood-burning stove and a hand pump outside for well water. The outhouse was a few yards away, old but functional. I unloaded my things. A duffel bag with clothes, a cooler with food, a few books. I set my lantern on the table, lit it, and started a fire in the fireplace. The air was already getting cool, and the warmth felt good. As I settled in, the quiet hit me. No humming of appliances, no distant traffic, just the sound of the fire cracking and the wind in the trees. It was peaceful. That first night, I slept deep, the kind of sleep that only comes when you're truly away from everything. When I woke up, the morning light was filtering through the trees. I stepped outside to stretch, taking in the crisp air. No one around, just the trees, the sound of birds, and the occasional rustling in the underbrush. I spent the day exploring. There was an old hiking trail behind the cabin, barely visible under fallen leaves and overgrown bushes. It led up a small ridge, giving me a view of the dense forest stretching out for miles. I sat up there for a while, just listening. No planes overhead, no distant voices, just wind and trees. That evening, I cooked a simple meal on the stove, read a bit, and went to bed early. I don't know what woke me, a sound, something outside. I lay still, listening. The fire had burned low, and the room was almost dark except for the faint glow of the embers. I heard it again, a rustling, something moving through the leaves just outside. Probably just an animal, I told myself. A deer, maybe, or a raccoon. Then I heard a sound that didn't fit. A footstep, not the light, careless movement of an animal. This was deliberate, slow. I sat up, my heart pounding. My brain fought with itself. Could be an animal, but it didn't sound like one. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it at the window. Nothing, just trees. I got up slowly, careful not to make any noise. I moved toward the window, peering out into the dark. The trees swayed in the wind, shadows shifting with every movement of the branches. I listened, waiting. Then I heard it again, closer. My breath caught in my throat. I had locked the door, right? I was sure I had, but I checked anyway. The bolt was in place. I grabbed the hatchet I had brought for chopping wood and gripped it tight. Minutes passed. My ears strained for any sound, but everything had gone silent again. I stood there, waiting, my fingers aching from how tightly I held the hatchet. Finally, after what felt like forever, I let out a slow breath, probably just my mind playing tricks on me. The forest was full of noises, and I wasn't used to them. I went back to bed but didn't sleep much. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind outside made me tense up, but nothing else happened. The next morning, I went outside and looked around. The ground was covered in leaves, twigs, and pine needles, making it hard to see any tracks. But near the porch steps, the leaves had been disturbed, kicked aside, not by an animal. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I had done that the day before and just didn't remember. Maybe I was overthinking everything. I forced myself to go about my day, collected some firewood, pumped fresh water, read for a while. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I locked up tight again, kept the hatchet by my bed, listened. Hours passed, and then I heard it. A creak, the sound of weight shifting on wood. The porch. Someone was standing on the porch. I held my breath, my body frozen. Then, slow as anything, the doorknob turned. Locked. Thank God. I stayed perfectly still, heart hammering, as whoever was outside tested the door. Another slow turn. A push. Then nothing. I sat in the dark, gripping the hatchet, waiting. Minutes dragged on. My ears strained for any sound. But whoever it was, they were patient. They didn't leave right away. I don't know how long I sat there, barely breathing, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, I heard footsteps, slow, moving away, back into the trees. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The first light, I packed my things. I barely ate, barely even thought. Just moved, fast as I could. By the time I threw my bag in the truck and started the engine, my hands were shaking. I didn't look back as I drove away. I never found out who it was. Never found out if they had been watching me the whole time, or if they had just stumbled across the cabin by chance. All I know is I'll never go back. I always wanted a place to get away, somewhere deep in the woods, where the noise of the world couldn't reach me. A few years ago, I finally bought a small cabin in northern Minnesota. It wasn't anything special, just an old structure built sometime in the 1970s, one bedroom, a small living area, and a wood stove for heat. It sat near a lake, surrounded by thick forest, isolated, peaceful. That's what I thought. I spent my first summer fixing it up. The previous owner hadn't used it in years. The roof leaked, mice had chewed through some of the insulation, and the deck out front was rotting in places. I didn't mind the work. It gave me something to do, something that made the place feel like mine. By the time fall came around, the cabin was in good shape. I installed new locks, reinforced the windows, and even dug out an old fire pit in the yard. I spent a lot of time out there, especially on weekends. I'd bring my dog, Bo, a German Shepherd mix, and we'd hike during the day, fish in the lake, and sit by the fire at night. There was no phone service, no internet, nothing to pull me back into the real world. Just me, my dog, and the quiet. But things started to feel off that winter. I went up in late December to check on the place. Snow had piled up against the door, and the roof was heavy with ice. I had to dig my way inside. Everything looked normal at first, cold and dark, but normal. Then I noticed something strange. The back door, which I always locked, was slightly open. Just an inch, but enough to send a shiver down my spine. I walked through the cabin, checking every corner. Nothing was missing, nothing was moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. I told myself the wind had pushed it open somehow, even though I knew that was impossible. The locks were strong, and the wind wasn't. I tried to put it out of my mind. That night, Bo wouldn't settle down. He kept pacing, ears up, sniffing at the door. I tried to calm him, but he stayed tense, growling under his breath. Every time I dozed off, he'd bark, waking me up. Eventually, around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep. I put another log on the fire and sat in the dim light, listening. Then I heard it, a crunch in the snow. Not the wind, not an animal, something heavier. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My heart pounded. I reached for my rifle, an old Winchester I kept by the bed. Bo was at the door now, growling low in his throat. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then nothing. The sound stopped. I waited for what felt like hours. My eyes locked on the door. I didn't hear the steps retreat, didn't hear anything else. Just silence. Morning came and I finally opened the door. Fresh snow covered the ground, except for a set of footprints leading from the tree line to my cabin. They stopped at my door. There were no prints leading away. I packed up and left that day. I didn't go back for months. I told myself I was busy, that I had work to do, that I didn't feel like dealing with the snow. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was scared. I had no explanation for what happened, and that terrified me more than anything. When I finally returned in the spring, I brought a friend with me, just to be safe. The cabin was fine. No signs of forced entry, no strange footprints. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But I never stayed there alone again. I eventually sold the place. I never told the new owner what happened. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something. All I know is that I still think about that night. I still remember those footprints in the snow. And I still wonder who or what was standing outside my door, waiting. I arrived at the cabin just before sundown. It was a long drive, a little over 6 hours, most of it through winding back roads that got narrower the farther I went. The last mile was barely more than a dirt path, one that looked like it hadn't been traveled in months. The trees hung low, their branches nearly scraping my truck as I rolled forward. When I finally broke through the dense woods, the cabin stood there, small and lonely against the vast wilderness behind it. It belonged to an old friend of mine who had moved overseas. He had offered it to me for the weekend when I mentioned needing a break. "It's quiet," he had said. "You'll have the whole place to yourself. No neighbors, no roads, nothing but trees." At the time, it had sounded perfect. I stepped out of my truck, the cold air sharp against my face. It was the kind of cold that felt deeper than just the weather, something about the land itself. The cabin was small, just one floor with a loft, built from old, dark wood that had seen better days. The windows were dusty. The porch creaked under my weight. I unlocked the front door, the key stiff in the old lock, and stepped inside. The air was stale, like it hadn't moved in a long time. Dust floated in the last bit of sunlight pouring through the windows. The place was basic, a small living room with a couch and an old stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen with a wooden table, a single bedroom in the back, and a narrow staircase leading up to the loft. There was no TV, no internet, barely any cell service. Just me, the cabin, and the endless stretch of trees outside. I dropped my bag on the couch and started checking the place over. The kitchen had canned food, the fridge was unplugged, and there was a stack of wood next to the fireplace. Everything seemed in order, but something felt off. Maybe it was just the quiet, the kind that presses in on you, makes you too aware of your own breath. I shook it off, started a fire in the fireplace, and set up my sleeping bag in the loft. The first night was fine. I read a book by lantern light, listened to the wind outside, then eventually fell asleep to the crackling fire below. But at some point in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. No sound, no reason, just wide awake. The fire was still burning, throwing shadows across the cabin. I listened, but all I could hear was my own breathing and the occasional pop from the firewood. I told myself it was nothing and went back to sleep. The next morning, I went outside to chop some firewood. The sun barely reached through the trees, casting long, dark shadows over the ground. That's when I noticed them. Footprints. They weren't mine. I hadn't walked around the back of the cabin, but there they were, clear in the damp earth. Deep boot prints leading from the trees to the back wall of the cabin. They stopped just short of the window. I felt my stomach tighten. Maybe they were old, left by my friend before he left. Maybe they were hunters passing through, but something about them made my skin crawl. I checked the window, but it was locked from the inside. I shook it off, convincing myself it was nothing, but the thought stayed with me all day. That night, I locked the door and shut the curtains before getting into my sleeping bag. The fire was warm, but I still felt cold. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I was alone out here. Then I woke up again. This time there was a noise, a slow, deliberate sound coming from outside the cabin. Footsteps, not the kind animals make. These were heavy, careful, moving just beyond the walls. My heart pounded in my chest. I stayed completely still, listening. The footsteps circled the cabin once, then stopped at the front door. Silence. I reached for the hunting knife I kept in my bag, gripping it so tight my hand shook. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the footsteps move again, fading back into the trees. I didn't sleep after that. I sat up in my loft, knife in hand, staring at the door until the first light of morning crept through the windows. When the sun finally rose, I went outside. The footprints were back, fresh in the dirt. They came from the woods, circled the cabin, stopped at the door, then disappeared back into the trees. I searched the woods, calling out, but no one answered. I knew then that I wasn't alone out there. I packed my things quickly. I didn't care if I had another night paid for. I wasn't staying. As I loaded my truck, I kept glancing at the trees, feeling watched. The whole drive back down that dirt road, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see someone standing at the tree line, watching me leave. When I finally reached the main road, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I didn't stop until I was hours away, back in the safety of city lights and traffic sounds. I never asked my friend about the cabin. I didn't want to know if he had seen the footprints too. I didn't want to know if he had ever heard someone walking outside at night. I never went back. I don't know why I agreed to come out here alone. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe I just wanted to prove something to myself. The drive up to the cabin had been long, winding through miles of trees that seemed to close in the farther I went. By the time I pulled up to the small clearing where the cabin sat, the sun was already dipping below the trees, bleeding orange light through the thick branches. The cabin was small, made of old, dark wood with a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. It looked abandoned, untouched for years, but I knew that wasn't the case. My uncle owned this place, said it had been in the family for generations, though no one ever really came out here anymore. It had no electricity, no running water, just a wood stove, some old furniture, and the woods stretching out in every direction. I stepped out of my truck, stretching my legs after the long drive. The air smelled like damp earth and pine, thick and heavy with the promise of rain. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat and made my way up the steps. The front door was stiff, the wood swollen from years of weather, but I pushed it open with my shoulder. Inside, it was exactly how I remembered from when I was a kid, dusty, dark, and filled with the heavy scent of aged wood and something faintly musty. The first thing I did was light the lanterns. Their glow flickered weakly at first, pushing back the creeping darkness. I set my bag down by the old couch, listening to the silence press in around me. It wasn't complete silence, though. The woods never really went quiet. There was the occasional rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl. But something about it felt different. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the isolation getting to me. I was too used to the noise of the city, too used to having people around. Being out here alone, with no phone signal, no way to reach anyone. It was making me uneasy, but I'd come here to clear my head, to get away for a bit. That's what I kept telling myself. I spent the first couple of hours unpacking, setting up my sleeping bag on the old mattress in the small bedroom. The mattress itself was hard and smelled faintly of mildew, but it would do. I made sure to check all the windows, locking them even though I knew no one else was out here. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound jolted me awake. The creak of the old wood, the wind rattling the loose window pane, the scratching of branches against the roof. I told myself it was all normal, but it didn't feel that way. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something heavier, a thump outside the cabin, close, too close. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. I held my breath, listening. Nothing, just the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I didn't move for what felt like hours, but eventually, exhaustion won. I drifted off into uneasy sleep. The next morning, I stepped outside to find fresh tracks in the dirt near the porch. They weren't animal tracks. Not deer, not coyote. They were boots. Someone had been walking around my cabin in the middle of the night. I scanned the tree line, but there was nothing. Just trees stretching in every direction. My stomach turned. Maybe it was a hunter passing through, Maybe just someone out here for the same reason I was. But why come so close? Why walk around my cabin in the dead of night? I spent most of the day chopping wood, keeping myself busy. Every so often, I'd catch myself glancing at the trees, at the shadows shifting between them. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, I barred the door with an old wooden chair. Probably wouldn't stop someone from getting in if they really wanted to, but it made me feel better. I sat by the lantern, my knife close at hand, and listened. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees, making the whole cabin groan. I tried to ignore the way the shadows stretched and moved in the dim light. And then, just past midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching in the dirt just beyond the porch. I held my breath, gripping my knife so tight my knuckles ached. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, that the wind was playing tricks on me. But then something scraped against the door. A slow, dragging sound. I stayed frozen, my body rigid, every muscle tensed. The footsteps moved, circling the cabin. My mind raced. I had no way to call for help. No gun, no real way to defend myself beyond the knife in my hand. Then silence. For what felt like an eternity, I sat there, waiting, but nothing happened. No one tried the door, no one broke the window. Eventually, the footsteps faded. I forced myself to stay awake until dawn, every noise setting my nerves on edge. When the first light broke through the trees, I stepped outside. More tracks, deep, pressed into the damp earth, circling the cabin again and again. Whoever it was, they'd been out there for hours, watching, waiting. I didn't wait to see if they'd come back. I grabbed my bag, threw it into my truck, and peeled out of there as fast as the old dirt road would let me. I didn't look back. I didn't care what I left behind. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted. But I know one thing for sure. I'm never going back to that cabin again. I had been searching for a place to escape for a while. City life was exhausting, the constant noise, the people, the stress. I needed a break, somewhere quiet, somewhere far away. That's how I found the cabin. It was listed on a rental site, buried under a bunch of other places, but something about it caught my eye. The pictures showed a small, isolated wooden cabin, deep in the forest. No neighbors, no roads nearby, just trees and silence. Exactly what I was looking for. The listing said it was about a 3-hour drive from the nearest town. It had no Wi-Fi, no cell service, no running water, just a well outside and a wood stove for heat. The owner warned that it was remote and not for everyone, but I didn't care. That was exactly what I wanted. A week alone, just me and nature. The drive there was long, but peaceful. The farther I got from civilization, the better I felt. The roads turned from pavement to gravel, then from gravel to dirt. The trees thickened, the sunlight barely cutting through the branches overhead. My GPS lost signal an hour before I reached the cabin, so I relied on the printed directions the owner had emailed me. When I finally arrived, I felt a deep sense of relief. The cabin looked just like the pictures, small, sturdy, with a porch and a single rocking chair. A firewood pile stacked against the wall. The well stood a few yards away, an old metal bucket hanging from the crank. It looked perfect. I unloaded my supplies. Canned food, a few bottles of water, a flashlight, batteries, a knife, and my old camping gear, just in case. The inside of the cabin was simple. A small bed with a thin mattress, a table and 2 chairs, a wood stove, and a shelf with a few old books. A single oil lamp sat on the table. It was exactly what I needed. That first night was peaceful. I built a small fire in the stove, cooked some canned soup, and read one of the dusty books I found on the shelf. The silence was almost unnerving, but I reminded myself that was why I came here. No traffic, no voices, just the wind through the trees. I fell asleep easily. The second night was when I started to feel it. I had spent the day exploring the woods. There was no marked trail, but I wandered, taking in the fresh air, the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. But something felt off. It was hard to explain, but the deeper I walked into the woods, the heavier the air felt. Like the silence wasn't just an absence of noise, but something pressing in on me. I found an old hunting stand, half rotted, leaning against a tree. A rusted rifle barrel stuck out from under a pile of leaves nearby. I had the strange thought that whoever left it never came back for it. I turned around after that, heading back to the cabin. That night, I woke up to a sound. A single, sharp crack outside, like a branch breaking under something heavy. I sat up, my heart pounding. The fire in the stove had burned low, the room dimly lit by the glow of embers. I listened. Nothing. Maybe a deer, I told myself. Maybe the wind. Then another sound. Closer. Not a branch breaking this time, but something dragging. A slow, scraping sound, like something heavy being pulled across the dirt. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and pointed it at the window. The glass was dirty, but I could see out onto the porch. Nothing. I told myself it was my imagination, forced myself to lay back down. But I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I stepped outside, my breath visible in the cold air. That's when I saw it. The dirt around the cabin had been disturbed. Long, uneven marks as if something had been dragged. The marks led from the trees, past the well, around the cabin, then disappeared back into the woods. My stomach twisted. Animals, I thought, had to be. Maybe a bear. I told myself that, but deep down I didn't believe it. I spent the day trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I forced myself to go about my routine, chop some wood, read, eat. But as the sun set, that feeling returned, stronger than before. That night, I barricaded the door with the table and chair. I kept my flashlight and knife within reach. I didn't even bother lighting the stove. I wanted to hear everything. The sounds started again. First, the branches snapping, then the dragging. But this time, there was something else. A low, rhythmic tapping, like knuckles against wood. I held my breath, gripping the knife so tight my hand ached. The tapping moved around the cabin. Slow, deliberate, then silence. I didn't sleep at all that night. When morning came, I packed my things. I didn't care that I had paid for a week. I wasn't staying another night. I stepped outside, ready to load my truck and get the hell out. Then I saw them. Footprints. Not boots. Not animal tracks. Bare footprints, large and deep in the dirt. They led from the woods, circled the cabin, and stopped at the door. I didn't stop to think. I threw my bag into the truck, started the engine, and tore down that dirt road faster than I ever had before. I didn't look back. I don't know who or what was out there, and I don't ever want to find out. I don't know why I said yes. Maybe I was tired of people thinking I was soft, or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. But now, sitting in the middle of nowhere with nothing but the sound of the wind against the trees and the distant creak of old wood, I regretted everything. The cabin belonged to my friend's uncle, or so he said. I never met the guy, but it wasn't like I cared to. The place had been sitting abandoned for years, deep in the woods, far from any roads or trails. The plan was simple: spend one night alone. No phone, no distractions, just me and the dark. It was stupid, really, but people do stupid things when they want to prove something. The walk-up had been uneventful, just an old dirt path overgrown with weeds. The sun had been slipping behind the trees when I reached the cabin, making everything feel colder. It was smaller than I expected, built from thick, rough logs that had aged to almost black. The windows were dusty, the glass wavy with age. The porch sagged in the middle, and the steps groaned under my weight. Inside, the air smelled stale, like old wood and something else. Something faint like rot. The furniture was sparse. A wooden table, a few mismatched chairs, a couch that had seen better days. Dust covered everything. A stone fireplace took up one wall, its opening black with soot. A single door led to what I assumed was the bedroom. I dropped my bag near the door and checked the place out. The bedroom was just as neglected. A small bed with a thin, stained mattress, a wooden dresser, and a window that looked out into the woods. I wasn't expecting comfort, but something about the place felt wrong. The air was too still, too heavy. I brushed it off. Just nerves. I locked the door out of habit, even though I doubted anyone was out here. There was no electricity, so once the sun went down, I was stuck with nothing but the weak glow of my flashlight. I set up my sleeping bag on the couch, trying to ignore the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here. Hours passed. The silence wasn't comforting like I thought it would be. It was too thick, like the woods were holding their breath. Every so often, the cabin creaked, settling, shifting. I tried to tell myself it was normal, just old wood expanding and contracting. But then I heard something different, something that didn't belong. A soft thud, then another, came from outside, near the trees. My first thought was an animal, maybe a deer moving through the brush. But the sound was too steady, too deliberate. Like footsteps, I turned off my flashlight and sat still, listening. The wind had died down, leaving nothing but silence. Then another step, closer this time. I swallowed hard and reached for the knife in my bag. I wasn't going to be an easy target. My heart pounded in my ears, and for a second, I thought I might be imagining it. But then the steps moved again, circling toward the back of the cabin. I gripped the knife tighter. There were no neighbors, no passing hikers. Whoever was out there was here on purpose. The steps stopped near the back door. A long, unbearable silence stretched out. Then the door handle rattled. Cold sweat ran down my back. The door was locked, but that didn't mean much. I debated my options. Running into the woods was out of the question. I didn't know the terrain, and I wasn't about to get lost in the dark. The only way out was the front door, but that meant exposing myself. Then, a sound that turned my stomach to ice. A slow, deliberate knock. 3 times. I held my breath, waiting. My brain raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe some lost camper? But no one just happens upon a place like this. The knock came again, slower this time. I tightened my grip on the knife and stood up as quietly as I could. If they were going to come in, I wasn't going to sit here and wait for it. I moved toward the fireplace, pressing my back against the cold stone. From here, I had a clear view of both doors. Then the knob twisted. The lock held. A moment of stillness. Then, something heavy slammed against the door. My lungs burned as I forced myself to stay silent. Another slam. The old wood groaned, but it held. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I waited. Minutes dragged by. The only sound was my own heartbeat. Then a shuffle. Footsteps retreating. I didn't move for what felt like hours. The air was thick, suffocating. Eventually, the wind picked up again, whispering through the trees. When the first light of dawn crept through the windows, I moved. My legs were stiff, my body sore from staying in the same position all night. I packed up my stuff in record time, never taking my eyes off the doors. Outside, the woods looked the same, but something was different. A feeling in my gut told me I wasn't alone. I scanned the trees, looking for any sign of movement. Then I saw them. Footprints, deep, deliberate, leading from the tree line to the back door, and then leading away. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared into the woods. I stood there for a long time, trying to convince myself it was over, that whoever or whatever it was had left. I didn't run. I walked, steady, measured steps, never looking back. The moment I reached my car, I locked the doors and drove. I didn't stop until I hit the main road. I never told my friend what happened, never asked about his uncle, never brought up the cabin again. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I think about the footprints, about the knock, and I wonder if they were waiting for me to open the door. I wasn't looking for an adventure when I agreed to stay at my uncle's cabin for a few days. I just needed some space, some quiet, a break from the constant hum of daily life. The cabin was deep in the woods, about 2 hours from the nearest town, a place where cell service was spotty at best, and the only sound at night was the wind in the trees. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun already starting to dip behind the trees. The road had been rough, nothing but dirt and gravel, winding through miles of dense forest. The cabin itself was old, but sturdy. A small porch, a single chimney, and a few windows with thick shutters. The wood was weathered, but my uncle had always kept the place in decent shape. He wasn't much of a talker, but when he handed me the keys, he made it clear that I should keep the doors locked at night. I figured it was just standard caution, being so isolated and all. Inside, the place smelled like pine and old smoke. The furniture was simple, worn from years of use. There was a fireplace, a small kitchen, a bedroom with a creaky wooden bed, and a tiny bathroom with questionable plumbing. I set my bag down, took a deep breath, and felt something I hadn't felt in a while: peace. That first night, I sat by the fire, reading a book I'd brought, letting the silence settle in around me. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters. I figured I'd be in for a storm, so I double-checked the windows and locked the front door before heading to bed. Sometime in the night, I woke up suddenly, not to a noise exactly, but to the lack of one. The wind had stopped. The usual creaks of the cabin seemed muted. It was too quiet. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my ears straining for anything. Then, I heard its slow, deliberate footsteps outside. It wasn't an animal. I knew that much right away. I'd spent enough time in the woods to know the difference between a deer moving through the brush and the sound of heavy boots on the wooden porch. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached for my phone, but as expected, no service. The steps moved to the door. A long pause, then the handle jiggled. Just once, like whoever was out there was testing it. My breath caught in my throat. I had locked it. I knew I had. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, moving toward the kitchen where I'd left a hunting knife on the counter. My uncle had told me to bring one, just in case. I hadn't expected to need it. Then, a new sound, something scraping against the wood near the doorframe. A slow, deliberate dragging, like a nail or a blade being run along the surface. My stomach twisted. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to break in. Not yet. They were waiting, watching, playing with me. I stayed completely still. My fingers tightened around the knife handle. I knew I couldn't just sit there all night. If they wanted to get in, they would. And if they were waiting for me to make a move, I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Then, after what felt like forever, the sound stopped. No footsteps, no scraping, just silence. I stayed awake until the sun came up. Only when the light started filtering through the trees did I work up the nerve to check the door. The handle was smeared with something dark. At first, I thought it was mud, but as I looked closer, my stomach turned. It was blood. I stepped outside, knife in hand, scanning the trees. Nothing, just the forest, stretching endlessly in every direction. I checked the ground. Footprints, big ones, leading from the woods, circling the cabin, then back into the trees. I packed my things immediately. Whatever was out there wasn't just some lost hiker. I wasn't going to wait around to find out what they wanted. As I drove back down that long, winding road, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone step out of the trees. But I never did. I told my uncle about it when I got back. He didn't seem surprised. He just nodded and said, "Yeah, that's why I don't stay there anymore." I never asked him what he meant, and I never went back. I didn't want to be there. The drive up had been long, the roads twisting through dense forest, the trees pressing in on either side. My cousin Eric had been the one who convinced me to go. He'd bought a small hunting cabin deep in the woods and wanted to spend a few days fixing it up. He wasn't much of a handyman, but he was excited about it. Said it was a good investment, a nice getaway spot. I didn't argue. I just agreed to come along. I had no real excuse not to. The cabin itself was old. The wood was dark and worn. The roof sagged a little in the middle. There was a porch with a single rocking chair that looked like it hadn't been sat in for years. The door was thick and heavy, the kind that stuck when you tried to open it. Inside, it smelled like dust and old wood. The air was stale, untouched for who knows how long. There was a small kitchen, a living room with an old couch and 2 bedrooms. Everything felt cramped. The windows were small, the light barely reaching inside. Eric had already been there a day before me. When I arrived, he had a fire going in the wood stove, his gear spread out on the floor. He looked comfortable, like he belonged there. I didn't feel the same. The first day passed slowly. We spent it clearing out debris, fixing what we could. The floorboards creaked under every step. The wind outside rattled the windows. Every once in a while, I'd catch the sound of something moving in the woods, branches breaking, leaves rustling, but I told myself it was just animals. The forest was full of them. That night, I barely slept. The bed in the small guest room was hard. The blankets smelled musty. I kept hearing noises outside, soft but distinct. Twigs snapping, the crunch of dead leaves. The cabin was miles from the nearest house, deep enough in the woods that we wouldn't be bothered. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something close. The next morning, Eric and I hiked out a few miles to check the land around the cabin. He wanted to find good spots for hunting, but I wasn't much help. I was distracted. I kept feeling like we were being watched. Every so often, I'd look over my shoulder, expecting to see something behind us, but there was never anything there, just trees. When we got back to the cabin, we found the front door wide open. Eric laughed it off, said I must have left it open. I knew I hadn't. I remembered pulling it shut, making sure it latched, but there was no sign of forced entry. Nothing inside had been disturbed. No footprints, no marks, nothing. Just an open door. That night, the sounds outside were louder, more distinct. I heard something heavy moving through the trees, slow and deliberate. I held my breath, listening. It wasn't an animal. I knew that much. Animals are quick, erratic. This was different, steady. I wanted to wake Eric, but I didn't. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, waiting. The next day, I convinced Eric to leave early. He was annoyed, said I was being paranoid, but I didn't care. Something wasn't right. He grumbled the whole way back to the truck, but as we loaded up our gear, I noticed something in the dirt near the porch. A single footprint, not an animal's. A boot print, large. Eric saw it too. He didn't say anything, just glanced at me, then back at the cabin. We didn't talk much on the way home. I don't know why I agreed to go to the cabin in the first place. Maybe I felt guilty. Maybe I just needed to get away from everything. Either way, it was a mistake. Started with my brother, Jake, calling me out of nowhere. We hadn't talked much in the past couple of years. Life happened. He had his family, his own things going on, and I had mine. But when he called, his voice had that edge to it. Tired, stretched thin. He needed help fixing up our dad's old hunting cabin before winter hit. Something about the foundation needing reinforcement, the roof leaking, general maintenance before the place rotted away completely. I didn't want to go, but it was our dad's place, and even though I didn't have good memories of it, I felt some kind of responsibility. The drive up was long and quiet. Trees blurred past the windows, the road narrowing the farther I went. There weren't any houses, no gas stations. Just empty roads and thick woods pressing in on either side. By the time I got to the turnoff, my phone had lost service. I took the dirt path slow, feeling my tires slip on loose gravel. The cabin was the same as I remembered, small, slumped against the earth like it was tired of standing. The wood had darkened with age, the windows streaked with grime. The porch sagged, the railing missing in places. It looked worse than I expected. Jake's truck was parked out front, covered in dust and dried mud. I cut the engine and sat there for a minute. Something about the place made my skin itch. It wasn't fear. It was something quieter, heavier, like the weight of old memories pressing down on me. Jake came out of the cabin, wiping his hands on his jeans. He looked older, more tired than the last time I saw him. He waved, and I forced myself to get out of the truck. The air smelled like damp wood and earth. The first day was uneventful. We worked in silence for the most part, only talking when we had to. The foundation had shifted more than we thought. The crawl space under the cabin was a mess. Old animal nests, broken beams, years of neglect. That night, we sat on the porch drinking cheap beer, listening to the sounds of the forest. crickets, the occasional rustling in the underbrush. The woods felt too big, too empty. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. Then, around midnight, I heard something. A dull thud against the side of the cabin. Jake heard it too. We both sat up, listening. Another thud, then nothing. Probably a branch falling, Jake muttered, but I saw the way he looked toward the trees. The next morning, I found deep scratches on the cabin's back wall. Not claw marks, something else. Long, deliberate scrapes in the wood, like someone had dragged a knife along the surface. I showed Jake. He frowned, but he didn't say much. We had work to do, and neither of us wanted to dwell on it. By the third night, I was struggling to sleep. Every noise outside made my nerves tighten. The air inside the cabin felt too still. The walls creaked like they were breathing. Around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, heavy. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard the door handle rattle. Not violently, just testing. I grabbed the rifle from under my bed and moved to the window, heart hammering. The porch was empty, but I knew what I heard. The next morning, I told Jake. He looked at me for a long time before sighing. "We should finish up quick," was all he said. We worked faster that day. The foundation was almost done, the roof patched up. We barely spoke. Something was wrong with that place. We both felt it. That night, we locked the doors, shut the windows tight. We agreed to take shifts sleeping. I took the first watch, sitting in the dark with the rifle across my lap. Around 1 a.m, the sounds started again. The soft crunch of footsteps circling the cabin. Then the scratching, slow, deliberate, like something was marking the wood. Jake woke up. We didn't speak. We just listened. Then something knocked on the door. 3 slow knocks. My throat went dry. Jake stood, moving toward the door like he was in a trance. I grabbed his arm, shook my head. We waited. The knocking didn't come again. The next morning, we found more scratches. This time, they weren't random. They formed words. "Let me in. I don't remember packing. I don't remember grabbing my things. I just remember getting in my truck, Jake right behind me, and driving." Neither of us spoke. We didn't look back. We never talked about it again. A few weeks later, Jake called me. His voice was different, hollow. "The cabin burned down," he said. "I didn't ask how. I didn't want to know. We never went back." I had been looking forward to this trip for months. A week alone in a rented cabin deep in the woods. Just me and nature. No work emails, no city noise, no obligations. It was supposed to be peaceful. It was supposed to be exactly what I needed. The drive took longer than expected. The roads twisted through dense forests, getting narrower the farther I went. I lost cell service about an hour before I even got to the place. It wasn't a big deal, I expected that. I had downloaded maps in advance, and the owner had left detailed directions. When I finally arrived, the cabin looked exactly like the photos. Small, simple, made of dark wood with a green metal roof. The front porch had an old rocking chair and a small pile of firewood stacked neatly against the wall. I parked my car beside it, unloaded my bags, and took a deep breath of the cool, pine-scented air. Everything was quiet except for the wind moving through the trees. Inside, the cabin was cozy but plain. A fireplace, a small kitchen, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a single bedroom and a bathroom. No TV, just how I wanted it. The owner had left a note on the kitchen counter welcoming me and reminding me to use the generator in case of a power outage. I spent the first evening settling in, unpacking my food, and making a fire. I ate dinner while listening to the sounds of the forest outside. At one point, I thought I heard something moving around near the trees, but I figured it was just an animal, maybe a deer. That night, I slept soundly. It wasn't until the second night that things started to feel off. I had just finished eating when I heard something outside. Not just movement, something deliberate, like footsteps. I turned off the lights, moved to the window, and peered out. Nothing, just the trees swaying in the wind. I went to bed, telling myself it was probably a raccoon or some other wildlife. But in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. My heart was pounding, but I didn't know why. The room was dark. The only sound the faint crackling of the fire that was still burning in the other room. Then I heard it again. Footsteps outside. Slow, steady, not an animal. I held my breath, listening. The steps stopped near the front porch. I could hear someone standing there, not moving, just there. I stayed in bed, barely breathing, waiting for something to happen. But after a few minutes, the sound was gone. I told myself I imagined it. Maybe I'd been dreaming. Maybe the wind had played tricks on me. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. In the dirt just outside the cabin, near the front porch, were footprints. They weren't mine. They were too large, too deep. I tried to stay rational. Maybe the owner had checked on the place recently. Maybe a hiker had wandered too close. Maybe I was overthinking. I spent the day exploring the area, trying to push the uneasy feeling away. The sun was bright, the air was crisp, and for a while, I let myself relax. But that night, it happened again. This time, it wasn't just footsteps. I heard something brush against the cabin walls. A slow, dragging sound, like fingers trailing across the wood. Then a soft tap, 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 on the window. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My whole body was tense, listening. Then silence. I waited for what felt like hours before I finally dared to move. I grabbed my flashlight and forced myself to look outside. Nothing. No movement. No footprints. Just the wind moving through the trees. The next morning, I found something else. The firewood on the porch had been moved. It had been stacked neatly when I arrived. Now it was scattered. A few logs were even missing. I checked my car, making sure nothing had been messed with. Everything seemed normal. I considered leaving early, but I told myself it was fine. I had a knife. I had a locked door. I could handle this. The fourth night was worse. I had kept a fire going all evening, not wanting to sit in the dark. But as I lay in bed, I heard something new. A whisper. Not words, just a sound. Soft, close, like someone breathing right outside the window. I wanted to move to check, but I couldn't. My body refused to respond. Then a long, slow scrape against the wall. I reached for my phone out of instinct, but there was no service, no way to call for help. I stayed awake the rest of the night, clutching the knife under the covers. By morning, I had made my decision. I packed my bags and loaded up the car. I didn't care about losing the last few days of my trip. I just wanted to leave. As I put the last bag in the trunk, I noticed something in the trees. A figure, too far to see clearly, but I knew it was a person. Standing there, watching me. I didn't wait. I got in the car, locked the doors, and drove. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I didn't feel safe until I was miles away, back on the highway, where other cars surrounded me. When I finally got home, I emailed the cabin owner, telling them someone had been messing around the place. They never responded. I don't know who was out there or what they wanted. I don't think I ever will. But I know one thing for sure. I'll never go back. I drove up the winding road, the tires of my old truck crunching against the gravel. The cabin was deep in the woods, far from any town, far from any neighbors. I had rented it for a week. The listing described it as a peaceful getaway, a place to unwind and disconnect. That was exactly what I needed. The last few months had been exhausting. Work had drained me. City life had become suffocating. I needed space to breathe. A week alone in a cabin with nothing but trees, fresh air, and quiet sounded perfect. The road narrowed as I got closer, the trees leaning in, branches scraping against the truck. The GPS had lost signal miles back, but I had followed the directions carefully. When I finally spotted the cabin through the trees, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was small, simple, a single-story structure with a porch stretching across the front. The wood was aged but solid. A stone chimney stood at one end. The roof was dark, steep, covered in damp leaves. There was a small clearing around it, but beyond that, the forest pressed in close. I parked the truck and stepped out. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. It was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling, just the occasional creak of trees shifting in the breeze. I grabbed my bags and walked up the porch steps. The wood groaned under my weight. I found the key under a loose stone, just like the owner had said, and unlocked the door. Inside, it was just as the listing had shown. A small kitchen, a sitting area with a fireplace, and a hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. The furniture was old but clean. The floor was wooden, the walls covered in dark paneling. There were only a few windows, and they were small. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its dim yellow light barely cutting through the shadows. I set my bags down and went back outside to gather firewood from the covered pile near the porch. I wanted the place warm before the night settled in. The temperature was already dropping, and I could see my breath in the air. After stacking the wood near the fireplace, I lit a fire. The dry logs caught quickly, and soon, the room filled with the comforting scent of burning wood. I sat down on the old couch, stretching my legs, letting the warmth seep into my bones. The quiet should have been relaxing, but something felt off. Couldn't place it. Maybe it was just the isolation. I wasn't used to being this far from people, from noise, from the hum of city life. I brushed it off and made a simple dinner, eating in silence. When I was done, I checked my phone. No service, no internet. The nearest town was about an hour away. It was just me and the woods. I went to bed early. The mattress was thin but not uncomfortable. I listened to the crackling fire in the other room, the only sound breaking the silence. Then, sometime in the night, I woke up. It was pitch black. The fire had died down to glowing embers. I lay still, listening. I wasn't sure what had woken me. Then I heard it. A sound from outside. Not an animal. Not the wind. Something heavier. Slow, deliberate steps on the porch. I held my breath. The sound stopped. The cabin was silent again. I waited, staring into the dark. Minutes passed. Nothing. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe a branch had fallen, or the wood had shifted with the cold. I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I stepped outside with my coffee. The sky was overcast, the air damp. I walked around the cabin, stretching my legs. Then I saw them. Footprints. Not mine. Not animal tracks. Boot prints leading from the trees to the porch. They stopped at the door. My stomach tightened. I hadn't heard a car. No neighbors, no hikers this deep in the woods. I hadn't locked the door last night. I went back inside and locked it now. The day passed slowly. I kept looking out the windows, scanning the trees. There was nothing. By afternoon, I convinced myself it had been someone passing through, someone lost. A hunter, maybe, but as night fell, the unease returned. I checked every window, locked the door, piled more wood in the fireplace. I sat on the couch, watching the flames. Then, just past midnight, I heard it again. Steps on the porch. Slow, heavy. I stayed completely still. My heart pounded in my chest. The fire crackled softly, the only other sound in the room. Then, a soft creak. The doorknob moved. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace, gripping it tight. The doorknob rattled again. The door was locked. A long silence. Then, finally, the steps moved away, back down the porch, into the trees. I didn't sleep. By morning, the footprints were back. The same boots. They circled the cabin this time. I packed my bags, threw them in the truck. I didn't bother cleaning up. I didn't care about the rental fee. I just wanted to leave. As I started the engine, I took one last look at the cabin, at the trees, and that's when I saw him, a figure, standing deep in the woods, dressed in dark clothes, watching me. I slammed the truck into reverse, gravel flying as I turned around. I didn't stop until I hit the highway, didn't breathe until the cabin was miles behind me. I never looked back. I don't know why I agreed to stay out there alone. Maybe it was pride, maybe stubbornness. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I could handle being completely cut off from everything for a few days. Whatever the reason, I regret it now. The cabin belonged to a friend of a friend. A one-room place deep in the woods, a solid hour's drive from the nearest paved road. No electricity, no running water, no cell signal. Just an old wood stove, a hand pump for water outside, and a lantern for light. It sounded peaceful when they described it. A good place to clear my head. I thought it would be relaxing. The drive out took longer than expected. The dirt roads were rough, filled with deep ruts and half-frozen mud. My truck fishtailed more than once, and by the time I finally saw the clearing with the small cabin sitting in the middle, the sun had already dipped low in the sky. The trees cast long shadows, and the air had that sharp, biting cold that settled in just before nightfall. The cabin was exactly as they had described. Small, made of rough-hewn logs, with a single window next to the door and a metal chimney sticking out of the roof. I parked close, grabbed my bag, and stepped out. The silence was immediate. No hum of distant traffic, no voices, no wind rustling through the trees. Just the sound of my boots crunching on the frosted ground. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of old wood and dust. I set my bag down and checked the wood stove. A small pile of chopped logs sat in the corner, enough to last a couple of nights. The lantern was on a small table next to a battered chair and a single bed with a thin mattress. I lit the lantern, started a fire, and settled in. The warmth spread slowly, pushing the cold out. I had brought some food, just simple stuff, canned soup, granola bars. After eating, I sat in the chair, listening. Nothing, just the crackling fire and my own breathing. It was too quiet. That first night, I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, convinced I had heard something outside. A branch breaking, leaves crunching. Every time I sat up, the only sound was my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I told myself it was just the woods settling, just normal nighttime sounds I wasn't used to. Still, I barely slept. The next day, I went for a walk. The woods stretched in every direction, dense and dark even in daylight. I found a small stream not far from the cabin, the water clear and bitterly cold. I knelt, splashed some on my face, and looked around. No sign of anyone. No footprints, no trails, nothing. Just endless trees. Back at the cabin, I spent the afternoon chopping wood, trying to keep my mind occupied. The work helped. It made me feel productive, less on edge. But as the sun started to set, the unease crept back in. The silence felt heavier, pressing in on me. I told myself I was just psyching myself out. That second night was worse. I woke up to the sound of something moving outside. Slow, deliberate steps crunching through the frost-covered leaves. My breath caught in my throat. I strained to listen, but the sound stopped. I sat up, gripping the blanket tight around me. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. My mind raced. A deer? A bear? But the steps had been too steady, too careful. I waited, heart hammering. Minutes passed. Nothing. Just as I started to convince myself I had imagined it, something scraped against the cabin wall. Not an animal. I froze. The sound was low, deliberate. A slow, dragging scrape like someone running a hand or a stick along the wood. It started near the door and moved toward the window. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Then it stopped. I sat there for what felt like hours, waiting, but nothing else happened. Eventually, exhaustion won. I must have dozed off because I woke up to daylight filtering through the window. The first thing I did was check outside. Nothing. No tracks, no signs of anyone. I spent the morning trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I told myself I was being stupid, that the isolation was getting to me. But by midday, I had made up my mind. I wasn't staying another night. I packed up, put out the fire, and stepped outside. The air was colder than before, the sky overcast. I walked around the cabin one last time just to be sure. That's when I saw them. On the wall, just beneath the window, were faint marks in the wood. Long, uneven scratches. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed my bag, threw it in the truck, and got in. The engine rumbled to life, and I backed out fast, the tires spinning slightly in the mud. As I turned onto the dirt road, I forced myself not to look back. The drive felt longer. The whole time, I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see something behind me, but there was nothing, just trees and the empty road. When I finally reached the highway, I felt like I could breathe again. The tension in my chest eased, but the unease didn't fully leave. I never told my friend what happened. I never asked about the cabin again, and I sure as hell never went back. I rented a cabin deep in the woods, far from the noise of the city. It was meant to be a quiet retreat, a place to breathe, to escape, to be alone with my thoughts. Work had been hell lately. Life had felt like a constant cycle of stress, and I needed a break. This cabin, small, isolated, tucked away miles from the nearest town, seemed perfect. The road leading there was rough, a narrow dirt path cutting through dense trees, their bare branches twisting against the overcast sky. It was early November, the air damp and cold, carrying that heavy scent of earth and decaying leaves. My tires crunched over fallen branches and rocks as I made my way up the uneven trail. The cabin itself was modest, built from dark, weathered logs. A small porch with a single wooden rocking chair faced the thick forest. The windows were old, glass slightly warped, and the front door had a heavy iron handle that felt ice cold in my hand when I first stepped inside. The inside smelled like wood smoke and dust, like it hadn't been used in a while. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, the chimney stretching up into the peaked ceiling. There was a small kitchen with an old gas stove, a rickety wooden table, and a single chair. The bedroom was little more than a cot with a thin mattress and a heavy wool blanket. It was simple, and that was exactly what I wanted. The first night, I built a fire. The wind outside had picked up, howling through the trees like distant voices. I told myself it was just the wind, the way it whistled through the branches, but it unsettled me in a way I couldn't shake. I sat in the chair near the fire, watching the flames dance, feeling the warmth seep into my skin. I had brought books, a notebook, my phone, though I had no signal this deep in the woods. It was supposed to be peaceful, but something about the silence felt too heavy, too thick, like it was pressing in around me. Around midnight, I heard something outside, a rustling, footsteps crunching over the dead leaves. I sat up, every muscle in my body going tense. I told myself it was just an animal, a deer maybe, a raccoon. But then the footsteps stopped, right outside the cabin. I held my breath, waiting, listening. The fire crackled behind me, casting shadows that flickered across the walls. Then, slowly, the footsteps moved again, circling the cabin. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace and stood, my heart hammering. I crept to the window, keeping to the side so I wouldn't be seen. The darkness outside was thick, the trees a jagged wall of black shapes against the night sky. Nothing. I waited. Minutes passed, but the sound didn't come again. After a while, I convinced myself I had imagined it, that it had just been an animal after all. I went to bed with the poker beside me. The next morning, I found footprints in the mud outside. Human footprints, bare feet too large to be mine. My stomach twisted as I stared at them. They led from the trees to the cabin, circling it once before disappearing back into the forest. I spent the day trying to rationalize it. Maybe a hiker had gotten lost, wandered through during the night. But who hikes barefoot in November? I walked around the cabin, looking for more signs of movement, but the footprints were the only thing I found. The forest felt too still, the air thick with something unspoken. I told myself I was being paranoid. That night, I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle just in case. The fire burned low as I sat, listening. Every creak of the cabin, every shift of the wind, made my skin crawl. Then, just past midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving toward the cabin. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My fingers curled around the poker, my pulse a heavy drum in my ears. The footsteps stopped right outside the front door. Silence stretched. Then, a long, slow scrape against the wood. Something was dragging its fingers down the door. I swallowed, throat dry. The firelight cast long, trembling shadows across the floor. My mind raced through every possibility, every explanation, but none of them made sense. And then, just as slowly as they had come, the footsteps moved away, back into the forest. I didn't sleep. By dawn, I had made up my mind to leave. I packed my things, shoved them into my bag, and stepped outside. The morning was quiet, the forest wrapped in thick mist. The ground was damp with fresh footprints, leading from the trees to my door. But there was something else this time. Scratched into the wood of the front door, deep grooves carved into the grain, were the words, "Leave now." I didn't hesitate. I threw my bag into my truck, turned the engine over, and tore down the dirt path without looking back. The trees blurred past, the road twisting and rough. I didn't stop until I hit the highway, until the forest was nothing but a dark shape in my rearview mirror. I don't know who or what was out there, but I never went back to that cabin. I took the long way to the cabin. The dirt road twisted through thick trees, the kind that swallowed daylight before the sun had a chance to fully set. I kept my truck slow, careful over the potholes. It had rained earlier in the day, and the ground was still slick. The last thing I needed was to get stuck in the middle of nowhere. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. A weekend alone, away from work, people, noise. The cabin was small, but it had everything I needed. No electricity, no running water, just a wood stove and a well out back. That's exactly why I picked it. When I finally pulled up, the sky had gone from a soft orange to deep blue. I killed the engine and just sat there for a minute, listening. No wind, no crickets. It was too quiet, but I ignored the feeling creeping up my spine. I was just tired from the drive. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat and stepped out. The air smelled damp, like wet leaves and old wood. The cabin sat a few yards ahead, barely visible in the fading light. It was smaller than I expected, just a single story with a slanted roof and a small porch. The front door was slightly ajar. I stopped in my tracks. I knew for a fact I had locked it. The owner had given me the key in person, told me it was a simple deadbolt, nothing fancy. My first thought was that someone had broken in. Maybe a bear had pushed through. I took slow steps up to the porch. The door creaked as I pushed it open the rest of the way. Inside, everything looked normal. The small cot in the corner was still neatly made. A stack of firewood sat by the stove, untouched. Nothing was missing, nothing out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I checked the back door. Locked. Windows, locked. The only thing that seemed strange was the dust on the floor. There were footprints, but not mine. Someone had been inside. I stood there for a long moment, heart pounding. I told myself it was probably the owner checking in before I got there. Maybe he forgot to lock up. But the tracks were fresh, and they led in from the front door, none leading out. I felt a chill crawl up my neck. I wasn't alone. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small hunting knife I always carried. I checked every inch of the cabin, under the cot, behind the stove, even inside the small cupboard in the corner. Empty. I exhaled, trying to calm myself down. I had two choices. Leave and drive back through miles of forest in the dark, or stay and keep my knife close. I had paid for the weekend. I had driven all this way. I stayed. I locked the door, wedging a chair under the handle for good measure. I made a fire, ate a cold sandwich from my bag, and tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind outside made my pulse jump. I kept my knife in my hand, fingers tight around the handle. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I must have dozed off. When I woke up, the fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate sound, like someone dragging a foot across the floor. My throat tightened. I gripped my knife harder, trying not to breathe too loud. The sound came again, closer this time. I forced myself to sit up, my eyes scanning the darkness. Nothing. The door was still shut, the chair still in place. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, listening. Then, just as I started to convince myself it was in my head, something touched the back of my foot. I jerked up so fast I nearly fell off the cot. The knife was out in front of me, shaking in my grip. I scrambled for the lantern on the floor and lit it with trembling hands. The light filled the cabin, but there was nothing there. The air felt thick, suffocating. I checked every corner again, knowing I wouldn't find anything. I didn't sleep after that. Morning came slow. As soon as the sky started to lighten, I packed my bag. I didn't care about the weekend anymore. Something was wrong with that place, and I wasn't going to stick around to figure out what. When I stepped outside, the woods felt different. The air was still, but not in the usual quiet way. It was like the whole forest was waiting, watching. I hurried to my truck and threw my bag in the passenger seat. I was about to start the engine when I noticed something on the ground near the porch. More footprints, but these were different. They didn't come from boots or bare feet. They were deep, uneven, almost claw-like. I stared at them for too long, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Then, without another second of hesitation, I turned the key, slammed the truck into reverse, and sped down the road without looking back. I don't know what was in that cabin. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, but I'll never go back to find out. I should have never agreed to stay in that cabin. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend away from everything. My job had been pushing me hard. My mind had been cluttered with stress, and I just needed a break. When my buddy Tom mentioned his family had an old hunting cabin a few hours out of the city, I figured it was the perfect place to clear my head. He even told me it was remote, way off the main road, surrounded by nothing but trees. That sounded good to me. I wanted quiet, no phones, no emails, just a few days alone with my thoughts. I packed light, some canned food, bottled water, my hunting knife, and a flashlight. Tom had given me a set of keys and a quick rundown of the place. No electricity, no running water, and a wood stove for heat. The road leading to the cabin wasn't even a real road, just a narrow dirt path barely wide enough for my truck. The further I drove, the rougher the terrain got, and soon, I was completely surrounded by thick forest. There was no sign of civilization anywhere. The cabin itself was small, just one room with a loft above. It was old, made of rough-hewn logs with a sagging roof and a stone chimney that looked like it might crumble at any moment. Inside, there was only the bare minimum. A rickety wooden table, a chair, a metal-framed bed with a thin mattress, and a pile of firewood stacked against the wall. The air inside smelled like dust and damp wood. The first night was uneventful. I built a fire, ate a can of cold beans, and listened to the wind outside. It was quiet, almost unnervingly so. No distant highway noise, no hum of electricity, just the occasional rustling of leaves. It should have been peaceful, but something about that deep silence made me uneasy. I woke up sometime in the night feeling like something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the hairs on my arms were standing up. I listened carefully. The wind had stopped. The trees had gone still. The silence now felt heavy, pressing down on me. I reached for my flashlight and shined it around the cabin, but nothing was out of place. Just an old hunting cabin in the middle of nowhere. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I found something strange outside. Near the fire pit, where I had been sitting the night before, the dirt looked disturbed, like someone had been there, shifting the soil with their hands. But there were no footprints, no tracks leading to or from the spot. I told myself it was probably just some animal, maybe a raccoon digging for food. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I spent the day chopping wood and trying to enjoy the quiet, but I kept glancing toward the trees, feeling watched. Every so often, I thought I saw movement, a shadow slipping between the trunks, just at the edge of my vision. But whenever I turned my head, there was nothing. That night, I made sure to lock the cabin door. I even wedged a chair under the handle just in case. I told myself I was being paranoid. I tried to sleep, but the unease only grew worse. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever, like unseen eyes were pressed against the cracks of the cabin walls. Then I heard it, a noise just outside the door, a slow, deliberate scraping sound, like something sharp dragging against the wood. My body tensed. I reached for my knife, heart hammering in my chest. The scraping stopped. I held my breath, straining to listen. The silence stretched on. Maybe it was a tree branch, I told myself. Just the wind. But I knew it wasn't. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I didn't care if I looked ridiculous. I packed my things, loaded up my truck, and was ready to go. But when I got to the driver's side door, I stopped dead in my tracks. Someone had been here. There were handprints on the window, not smudges. Full, clear handprints pressed into the glass. They were small, like a child's, but too long, the fingers slightly too thin. My stomach dropped. My own footprints were the only ones in the dirt around the truck. I didn't waste any more time. I threw myself into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and turned it. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then died. No. I tried again. Nothing. I popped the hood and looked over the engine, but I didn't know what I was looking for. I wasn't a mechanic. Everything looked fine, but the truck wouldn't start. I was stranded. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my mind racing. The nearest town was over 20 miles away. I had no cell service, no radio. I could try to hike back to the main road, but something in my gut told me I wouldn't make it. I locked myself inside the cabin before sundown. I blocked the windows with whatever I could find, piled wood in the stove, and kept my knife close. Night fell too fast. The darkness outside felt alive. Then the noises started again. This time it wasn't just scratching. There were soft footsteps circling the cabin. Slow, patient. I gripped my knife so hard my knuckles turned white. The footsteps stopped, and then, one by one, the small handprints started appearing on the window glass. I watched in horror as they pressed against the glass from the outside, spreading like fingerprints on a fogged mirror. They were reaching, searching, and then the door handle turned. I don't remember much after that. I think I must have blacked out from fear, because when I opened my eyes, daylight was pouring through the cracks in the walls. Everything was quiet. The handprints were gone. My truck started on the first try. I didn't stop driving until I was back home. I never told Tom what happened. I never told anyone. I don't have an explanation. I don't know what was out there, but I know it wasn't human. And I know it wasn't a dream. I'll never go back to that cabin again. Got it. Here's your long, detailed, and realistic horror story set in a cabin. #### trapped in the woods. I never should have come out here alone. That thought kept repeating in my head as I sat in the dark, my back pressed against the cold wooden wall of the cabin, gripping the hunting knife so tightly that my hand ached. The wind howled through the trees outside, rattling the old windows, making the cabin groan like it was alive. My breath came out in short, sharp gasps, the taste of fear bitter in my mouth. I had come out here for a simple weekend alone, a break from everything, from work, from people, from the constant hum of life that never seemed to stop pressing down on me. I had found the cabin online, a cheap rental, buried deep in the woods, miles away from any town. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just me, the trees, and silence. It sounded perfect at the time. It took nearly 4 hours to get here, the last hour spent on a narrow dirt road that wound through thick woods, barely wide enough for my truck. The trees pressed in close, their branches scraping against the sides like fingers trying to reach in. I remember feeling a sense of unease even then, but I brushed it off. I told myself I was just being dramatic. The cabin itself was old but sturdy. A simple structure, a small kitchen, a living area with a stone fireplace, a single bedroom and a bathroom. It smelled like damp wood and dust, like no one had been here in a long time. The guy who rented it out had said he didn't come up much anymore. He warned me about the generator, said it could be unreliable, but assured me there was enough firewood to last a week if I needed it. That first night was quiet. I built a fire, made some canned chili, and sat outside on the porch, listening to the sounds of the forest. First, it was peaceful, just the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional creak of a tree shifting in the wind. But after a while, I started to notice something else. The woods were too quiet. Every so often, I'd hear a sound, something moving through the trees. At first, I told myself it was just an animal, a deer maybe or a raccoon, but it didn't feel right. The noises were slow, deliberate, like footsteps, and they stopped whenever I tried to focus on them. I went inside, locked the door, and told myself I was being paranoid. The next morning, I decided to explore a bit. The forest was dense, the trees packed so tightly together that barely any sunlight reached the ground. I followed a small trail that led away from the cabin, winding deeper into the woods. The farther I went, the more uneasy I felt. It wasn't just the silence, it was the feeling that I wasn't alone, that I was being watched. After about an hour, I found something that made my stomach turn. Clearing. At first, it looked normal, just a patch of land where the trees gave way to open space. But in the center of it, there was something wrong. A pile of bones. They were picked clean, bleached white by the sun. At first, I thought they were animal bones, but the longer I looked, the less sure I was. Some of them were too big. And then I saw something that sent a jolt of ice through my chest. A piece of fabric, tangled in the brush nearby. Dark, weathered, almost completely rotted away. But it was unmistakably a piece of clothing. I turned and got the hell out of there. By the time I made it back to the cabin, I was sweating, my heart hammering in my chest. I locked the door behind me, checked all the windows, and forced myself to calm down. I needed to leave, but when I tried to start my truck, nothing happened. I turned the key again. Nothing, not even a click, like the battery was dead. I popped the hood, checked the connections. Everything looked fine. The truck had been running perfectly when I got here. There was no reason for it to suddenly die. I felt the first real grip of fear in my chest then. I was stranded. That night, the noises started again. Louder this time. Closer. I sat by the fire, knife in hand, every muscle in my body tense. The sound of footsteps, moving through the leaves outside. Slow, careful, like someone trying not to be heard. I didn't sleep. The next day, I hiked back to where I had a bit of cell reception on the drive-in. It was a long walk, but I needed to call for help. No service. I kept walking, hoping I'd find a signal, but it never came. I was completely cut off. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sun was starting to set. That was when I saw them. Footprints. Not mine. They led from the edge of the trees to the cabin, circling it. Someone had been out here while I was gone. Panic set in hard. I locked the door, barricaded it with the couch, and sat by the fireplace, knife in my lap. My mind raced with possibilities. A hunter? Some local messing with me? But why? Then, sometime deep into the night, I heard the doorknob rattle. I froze. It was slow at first, a slight jiggle like someone testing it, then harder. The door creaked as it strained against the lock. I held my breath, heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. Then silence. I didn't move for what felt like hours. The fire crackled, the wind howled, but I didn't hear another sound outside. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I must have dozed off. When I woke up, the sun was just starting to rise, and the front door was open, not just unlocked, wide open. The barricade was pushed aside like it was nothing. I grabbed the knife and slowly stepped outside. The morning air was cold, my breath coming out in shaky clouds. The footprints were still there, circling the cabin. But now there were more of them. I wasn't dealing with one person. I packed what I could in my backpack. Food, water, the knife, and I left. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. I walked for hours, trying to find the road I had come in on. But the woods were different now. No matter which way I went, I couldn't find my way out. It was like the forest had swallowed the road. By the time the sun started to set again, I knew I was in trouble. That was when I saw the first one. A figure, standing between the trees, just far enough away that I couldn't make out their face. Just standing there watching me. Then another one, and another. My stomach dropped. I turned and ran. I don't know how long I ran, But eventually, I saw something through the trees. A cabin. Not mine. A different one. I didn't care. I sprinted toward it, legs burning, lungs aching. The door was unlocked. I slammed it shut behind me, bolting it. The cabin was empty, dusty, abandoned, but the fireplace was stacked with wood. I started a fire and sat in the corner, knife in hand, waiting. They never tried to get in. They didn't have to, because when I woke up the next morning, the door was wide open, and the footprints were inside. Ending explanation asterisk. The story ends with the realization that whoever or whatever was out there had already gotten inside while the protagonist slept. This leaves an unsettling final note, making it clear that escape may not be possible. I always wanted to spend time alone in the woods. Not forever, just a week or so. Something about the quiet, the stillness of nature, and being away from everything sounded good. I needed the break. Life had been weighing on me, and I figured a small, cheap rental cabin deep in the woods would be the perfect place to clear my head. The cabin I found was a simple one-room structure with a small kitchen, a bed, a wood stove, and a bathroom. It was old but solid. The owner said it didn't have great cell service, but that was fine. That was part of the point. It sat at the end of a long dirt road, miles from anyone. The nearest town was a good 40-minute drive away, and the last stretch to get there was rough. The first night was peaceful. I sat outside on the small porch, listening to the wind in the trees. There were no cars, no voices, nothing but the occasional crack of a branch somewhere out in the woods. It was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. I read for a while by lantern light, then went inside, locked the door, and went to bed. It was around 2 in the morning when I woke up. Something had pulled me from my sleep, but I wasn't sure what. I lay there in the dark, listening. The wind had picked up, but that wasn't it. Then I heard it, a sound just outside. It wasn't an animal. I knew that right away. Animals move quickly or make scurrying noises. This was slow, careful, deliberate movement, like footsteps. I held my breath. I told myself it was my imagination, that being alone in the woods was making me hear things, that maybe a tree limb had cracked and fallen. I reached for my phone to check the time, but I had no signal, no messages, no bars, nothing. That's when I heard it again, a shuffling step, then another. It sounded close. I didn't move. I kept listening, waiting for whatever it was to move away. But it didn't. It just stayed there. It was like whoever or whatever it was wanted me to know they were there. I stayed as still as I could. Eventually, after what felt like forever, the sound faded. I don't know if it left or just stopped making noise, but I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Morning came, and everything felt normal again. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and the fear from the night before seemed almost ridiculous. Still, I walked around outside, looking for footprints. The ground was mostly packed dirt and pine needles, so if someone had been out there, they hadn't left much behind. I told myself I had imagined it. Maybe the wind had made it sound like something was moving when it wasn't. I didn't believe it, but it was easier to pretend. The next night, it happened again. This time, I was already awake. I hadn't been able to sleep. I was lying there in the dark when I heard the first step. Slow, deliberate, closer. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was someone. I grabbed the flashlight I had next to the bed and pointed it at the window. Nothing, just the trees swaying in the dark. But the sound continued. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't half asleep. Someone was out there. I wanted to call for help, but my phone still had no signal. I stayed awake all night, listening, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, the sound stopped again, just like the night before. When the sun came up, I checked outside. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches. Nothing that told me what I already knew. Someone was out there. I decided to leave that morning. Whatever was happening, I didn't want to stay and find out. I packed up my things, threw them in my car, and started the long drive back to town. I had to stop at a gas station on the way, and that's when I finally got service again. My phone vibrated like crazy, messages and missed calls coming in all at once. But one notification made me stop cold. It was a motion alert from the cabin's doorbell camera. I hadn't even thought about it. The place had an old security system, the kind you had to arm manually. I never did, but the doorbell camera had still been on. My hands were shaking as I tapped the notification and watched the footage. It was from the night before. The timestamp was just after 3 in the morning. The camera only caught part of the porch, but it was enough. There was a man standing just outside the door. Not moving, not knocking, just standing there. He was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes, his face partly covered by what looked like a hood. He stood there for over 5 minutes, barely moving, just watching. Then, slowly, he stepped back into the darkness and disappeared. I never went back to the cabin. I called the owner, told them what happened, and they said no one was supposed to be out there. No one had rented the place before me for weeks. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but I do know one thing. I wasn't alone out there, and he wasn't just passing through. He was waiting. I had always wanted to spend a few nights alone in the woods, just to see what it was like. Not for the thrill, not for some survivalist fantasy, but just to get away from everything for a while. Work had been stressful, my personal life had been a mess, and I was tired of people. I needed to be alone, just for a little while. I found the place online. It was a small, one-room cabin sitting deep in the woods, about 20 miles outside of town. The owner described it as off-grid, which meant no electricity, no running water, and no cell service. Perfect. I booked it for a long weekend and packed light. A sleeping bag, some food, a flashlight, a knife, and a few other essentials. Nothing fancy. The drive there was uneventful. Just miles of empty road, then a long dirt path leading deep into the trees. When I arrived, the cabin was exactly what I expected. Small, worn down, but still standing. A single door, a few windows, a porch with an old rocking chair. The woods around it were thick, the trees towering above like a natural wall. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and damp wood. There was a cot in one corner, a rusted wood stove in another, and a single table with a chair. A small shelf held a few old canned goods and a half-empty bottle of whiskey. There were no decorations, nothing personal, just a place meant for sleeping and little else. I set my bag down and started getting settled. The first thing I did was check the door and windows. They locked, but the wood was old, and the hinges were loose. Not the best security, but I wasn't worried. No one knew I was here except the owner, and I doubted anyone came out this way much. The first night was uneventful. I sat on the porch, ate some canned soup, and watched the sky darken. When the stars came out, the forest was black as ink, the trees barely visible against the night. The only sounds were the occasional rustling in the bushes, probably a raccoon or some other small animal. I went inside, locked the door, and climbed into my sleeping bag. The silence was almost unnerving, but I told myself it was just my imagination. I had spent too much time in the city, too used to distant traffic noise and people talking in the background. I eventually drifted off. Then something woke me up. It was still dark. I wasn't sure what time it was, but I knew it was late. My eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the window. Something felt off. The kind of feeling you get when you think someone is watching you. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. Then I heard it. A soft, steady sound coming from outside. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching on the dry leaves just beyond the cabin. My heart pounded. I stayed completely still, straining to hear. The steps moved around the cabin, circling it. I reached for my knife, gripping the handle tightly. I wanted to believe it was just an animal, maybe a deer, but no animal walks like that. No animal moves with that kind of purpose. The footsteps stopped near the front door. I held my breath. My body was tense, my mind racing. If someone was out there, what did they want? Who even knew I was here? Then, after what felt like an eternity, the steps moved away, slowly fading into the trees. I didn't move until the sun started coming up. The next morning, I stepped outside and looked around. No signs of anything unusual. No footprints, no broken branches. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I had been half asleep, dreaming. That's what I told myself. But I didn't sleep that next night. I stayed up, sitting near the window with my flashlight and knife. I listened, and sure enough, sometime around midnight, the footsteps came back. This time, they didn't circle. They stopped right outside the door. I could hear breathing. Not an animal, not wind. Breathing. Slow, steady, right on the other side of the door. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Then something pressed against the door. A shadow moved in front of the window, blocking out what little moonlight there was. My stomach dropped. Someone was there. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The shadow moved away. The breathing faded. The footsteps retreated into the trees. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At dawn, I made my decision. I was leaving. I packed my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and stepped outside. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. I started down the dirt path toward my car, my heart hammering in my chest. Every few steps, I looked over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Then I saw it. A single set of footprints in the dirt, leading from the trees straight to the cabin, and none leading away. I didn't run, but I walked faster. When I reached my car, I practically threw my bag inside and got in. The engine roared to life, and I sped down the road without looking back. I never told anyone what happened. I never went back. But sometimes late at night, I think about it. About the footsteps, about the breathing, about the footprints leading to my cabin but never away. And I wonder if whoever was out there that night is still waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the floor. My hands were still shaking, my fingers stiff and numb from gripping the knife for so long. The cabin smelled like sweat and blood, a mix of old wood and something deeper, something wrong. The lantern flickered on the table, casting shadows that seemed to stretch too far in the corners of the room. Outside, the wind scraped tree branches against the window, a sound I would have barely noticed before. Now every noise felt like a warning. It had started out as a normal trip. I'd rented the cabin for a week, looking for some quiet. Work had been running me into the ground, and I just wanted a break. No phone, no emails, just me in the woods. The cabin was isolated, the nearest town about an hour's drive away. It wasn't fancy, just a small one-room place with a lofted bed, a wood stove, and a little kitchenette. There was an outhouse a short walk into the trees, the kind of place that forced you to slow down, to let go of everything buzzing in your head. It had sounded perfect. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun sinking low behind the hills. The drive had been long, nothing but stretches of empty road cutting through dense trees. No houses, no signs of life, just me and the car and the endless green. By the time I parked and unloaded my bags, the forest was settling into dusk, the air thick and cool. I should have noticed it then. There was a feeling just beneath the surface, the kind of quiet that didn't feel right. I brushed it off as exhaustion, told myself I was overthinking things. I set my bags inside, lit the lanterns, and started a fire in the stove. The cabin creaked as it warmed up, the old wood expanding, breathing. I ate a quick dinner, read for a while by the dim light, then crawled into bed, ready to let the stress melt away. But I didn't sleep well. It wasn't the sounds of the woods that kept me awake. It was something else, a stillness, the kind that pressed down on you, made you feel like you weren't alone. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that I was just getting used to the isolation. But then, just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it, a soft scrape. Not the trees against the window, not the shifting of the cabin's old wood. Something else, something moving. I held my breath, my heart pounding. The sound had come from outside, near the porch. I told myself it was an animal, a raccoon maybe, but I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just listened. Silence. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I stepped onto the porch, my breath fogging in the cold air. The ground was damp from the night's dew, the leaves dark and heavy. I glanced around, looking for tracks. There, just beneath the window, was a footprint. Bare. Human. I froze. My mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe someone had passed through. Maybe some hiker had gotten lost. But I knew better. The cabin was miles from any trail, and the print was fresh, the edges still sharp in the damp earth. Someone had been here, watching, listening. I spent the day trying to shake the feeling. I told myself it was nothing, just some stray camper, some drifter. I chopped wood, fished at the nearby stream, kept busy. By the time the sun set, I almost believed it. But that night, the noise came again. Soft, deliberate, closer. I sat up in bed, every muscle locked in place. The lantern flickered on the table, casting long, shifting shadows. I reached for the knife I kept by the bed, gripping the handle so tight my knuckles ached. Then the doorknob moved. Slow, testing. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. Then silence. I waited, counting the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. Then footsteps. Slow, fading, moving around the cabin. I stayed awake until the sky turned gray with morning light. When I finally stepped outside, the air was still, heavy. I checked around the cabin. More footprints, more signs that someone had been there, circling the cabin, watching. That was when I knew I had to leave. I packed my things, moving fast. But when I went to start the car, the engine just clicked. Dead. I checked the hood, my hands shaking. The battery cables had been cut. I stood there, breathing hard. The nearest town was an hour's drive away on foot. It would take half a day. I had no signal, no way to call for help. I grabbed my knife, locked the cabin door, and waited. The night came fast, swallowing the last light. I kept the lantern low, crouched near the door, knife in hand. The woods were too quiet. No wind, no rustling leaves. Just silence. Then a sound. Not from outside. From inside. A slow creak. Floorboards shifting. My breath caught in my throat. The lantern flickered, the shadows stretching. I tightened my grip on the knife. Then, from the loft above me, a whisper of movement. Someone was inside. I didn't think. I ran. I hit the door hard, breaking into the cold night. The woods swallowed me, branches scratching my arms, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, the cabin door creaked open. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out, until my lungs burned, until the sky turned gray with morning light. When I finally stumbled onto a dirt road, I barely had the strength to wave down the truck that found me. The cops never found anyone at the cabin. They didn't find footprints, didn't find signs of forced entry. Just my car, battery cables cleanly severed, doors wide open. They told me it was an animal, that I'd been alone, that my mind had played tricks on me. I know better. Something was there, watching, waiting, and it wasn't alone. I drove up the mountain road slowly, my headlights cutting through the early evening fog. The sun had dipped below the tree line, leaving behind streaks of fading orange in the sky. The cabin was still a few miles ahead, and I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. It was exactly what I wanted. A weekend alone, away from the noise, away from the stress, away from everything. No emails, no phone calls, just the quiet of the woods and the cold air of late autumn. I had rented the cabin online. It was old, but the pictures showed a sturdy structure, small but comfortable. The listing had described it as secluded and perfect for solitude. That's what I needed. The stress of work had been wearing me thin, and the constant presence of people had started to drain me in a way I couldn't explain. I had to get away. As I neared the property, the road narrowed to little more than a dirt path. The trees on either side were thick, their branches hanging low enough that I had to duck when I got out of the car to open the rusted gate. The lock was already undone, hanging loosely from the chain. I frowned at that, but assumed the property owner had left it open for me. Still, it unsettled me. I drove through and pulled up in front of the cabin. The structure was small, made of dark wood that looked almost black in the dimming light. There was a porch with a single rocking chair, and next to the door, a window with dusty curtains drawn halfway. The woods surrounded the place entirely, dense enough that I couldn't see past the first few trees. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening. Nothing. No wind, no insects, no birds. Just stillness. Shaking off the unease, I grabbed my bag and stepped out. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth. My boots crunched against the gravel as I approached the door. The key was under the mat, just as the owner had said it would be. I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The inside was about what I expected. Small, rustic, and simple. A wooden table with 2 chairs sat near the window. A fireplace with a neatly stacked pile of logs beside it. A small kitchenette, a single bed against the wall, and a door that I assumed led to the bathroom. I dropped my bag on the bed and took a deep breath. The air inside was stale, like the place hadn't been aired out in months. I walked over to the window and pushed it open, letting the cold evening air rush in. After unpacking, I built a fire in the fireplace. The warmth spread quickly, filling the cabin with a soft, flickering glow. I made myself a cup of instant coffee and sat down at the table, staring out into the dark woods. That's when I noticed it. The trees directly in front of the cabin looked different. The branches seemed broken, snapped in places as if something large had pushed through them. The ground looked disturbed, the leaves scattered unnaturally. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a bear. Still, I didn't like it. I shook it off and went back to my coffee. The warmth helped, but the unease lingered. I locked the door, checked the windows, and climbed into bed, pulling the blankets tight around me. The fire crackled softly, and the warmth made my eyelids heavy. Sometime in the night, I woke up. Something had woken me. The fire had burned down to embers, casting weak shadows on the walls. The cabin was silent, but I felt it, that gut-deep feeling that something was off. Then I heard it, a sound outside, soft but deliberate. Footsteps, not an animal, human. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped just outside the window. I couldn't see anything through the curtains, but I knew someone was there. I stayed still, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. The footsteps moved again, slow and careful, circling the cabin. Then, a soft scrape against the wooden wall. I grabbed my phone and checked the signal. Nothing. No bars. I had expected that, but it still made my stomach twist. The footsteps stopped at the front door. A long pause. Then the door handle rattled. I shot out of bed, grabbed the fireplace poker, and pressed myself against the wall. The rattling stopped. Silence. Then retreating footsteps, fading into the trees. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Morning came slow. When the first light crept through the window, I finally moved. I forced myself to check outside, half expecting to find nothing, to convince myself it was just a dream. But the footprints were there, clear, deep prints in the dirt, circling the cabin. I packed my things, locked the door, and got in my car. As I drove away, I looked back once, just once. A figure stood at the tree line, watching. I didn't stop. I didn't look again. I just kept driving. I don't know why I went back. The cabin sat deep in the woods, tucked away on a stretch of land that hardly anyone ventured near. It had belonged to my uncle, but he died years ago, leaving it abandoned. I remember visiting as a kid, spending summers running through the trees, the warm smell of pine and dirt thick in the air. It was peaceful back then. That's not how it felt now. The drive was longer than I remembered, the roads narrower, the trees pressing in like they wanted to swallow the gravel path entirely. My truck's tires crunched over twigs and dead leaves as I pulled up in front of the cabin. It looked just like it had when I was a kid. Weathered wood, a sagging roof, windows covered in dust. It should have felt familiar, but the second I stepped out of the truck, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. The door creaked as I pushed it open. the smell of old wood and mildew rushing out to meet me. I flicked on the flashlight. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by my movement. Everything was where it had always been. The wooden table, the worn-out couch, the fireplace stacked with old logs. It should have felt comforting. Instead, the silence pressed in on me, heavy and thick. I set my bag down and got to work. I wasn't here for fun. The cabin needed cleaning up, maybe even fixing if I decided to sell it. I wasn't sure yet. I just knew I needed to see it again. Needed to be here one last time. The first night was restless. The woods were alive with noise, branches snapping, leaves rustling, animals moving unseen through the darkness. But something else was off. I'd wake up every hour, heart pounding, feeling like something was watching me. The rational part of me blamed the isolation, the way the mind plays tricks when you're alone in the middle of nowhere. By the second night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't just my imagination. Something was out there. I heard it first around midnight. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving outside, circling the cabin. Not the quick scurry of an animal, these were heavy, human. My hands tightened around the flashlight as I listened, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped near the front porch, then silence. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping the flashlight like it was a weapon, waiting for something to happen. But nothing ever did. Morning felt safer. I walked the perimeter, searching for any sign of someone being out there. Nothing, just damp earth and fallen leaves. The woods stretching endlessly in every direction. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was losing my mind out here. That afternoon, I decided to check the storage shed out back. It had always been locked, even when my uncle was alive. I found the key in a drawer inside the cabin, rusted but still intact. The door groaned as I pulled it open, revealing old tools, rusted saws, stacks of firewood, and something else, a trapdoor in the ground. I stared at it, heart hammering. It wasn't there when I was a kid. My uncle never mentioned anything about it. The handle was old, metal tarnished with time, but when I pulled, it lifted easily. A wooden ladder led down into darkness. Every instinct told me to leave it alone, but I didn't. The air was damp, thick with the smell of earth and decay. My flashlight flickered as I climbed down. The space wasn't large, just a dirt floor and wooden walls, but there was something in the corner. A pile of clothes, old and rotting, covered in dirt. Bones, small ones, animal maybe, and scratches along the walls, deep and uneven, like someone had tried to claw their way out. A shiver ran through me. My uncle had always been a quiet man, kept to himself. But this was something else. I backed up, climbing the ladder in a hurry, slamming the trapdoor shut. My hands were shaking. That night, the footsteps returned. Louder, closer. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, flashlight in hand, waiting. Around 3 a.m., I heard something new. The creak of a floorboard inside the cabin. I wasn't alone. My body froze. I listened, heart pounding, as something moved in the darkness. Slow, deliberate. My truck keys were on the table just a few feet away. If I could grab them, make it to the door. A shadow shifted in the hallway. I ran, keys in hand. I threw open the door and sprinted to the truck. My hands fumbled with the lock, breath coming in panicked gasps. The moment the engine roared to life, I hit the gas, gravel spraying as I tore down the dirt road. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I drove until I reached the nearest town, checking into a motel for the night. My hands didn't stop shaking until morning. I never went back for my things. I never told anyone what happened. The cabin still sits there, waiting, deep in those woods. But I won't go back. I know I wasn't alone that night, and whoever, whatever was there is still waiting. I don't know why I agreed to stay in that cabin alone. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself. Maybe I just needed a break from everything. Work, people, the endless noise of life. But if I could go back, I would never have set foot inside that place. It wasn't like the cabin was in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was about a 40-minute drive. a little dot on the map with a gas station, a diner, and a few other buildings. The cabin itself sat at the end of a long dirt road, hidden between thick trees that seemed to press in from all sides. It wasn't old or abandoned, just isolated. That's what I wanted, though. I had been feeling overwhelmed lately, and a week away from everything sounded perfect. The first day was fine. I spent the afternoon unloading my supplies and getting used to the quiet. The cabin was small but had everything I needed. A bed, a tiny kitchen, a wood stove for heat, and a bathroom that, thankfully, had running water. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi, and barely any cell signal. That was the point. By evening, the forest around me felt almost too quiet. No distant hum of cars, no voices, nothing. Just the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. I wasn't scared, just aware of how alone I was. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and went to bed early. I woke up in the middle of the night, sweating. I wasn't sure why at first. Then I realized it was completely silent. Too silent. Before I had fallen asleep, I could hear the wind, the creak of the trees. Now there was nothing. I listened for a long time, heart pounding, before I finally convinced myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I just wasn't used to the quiet. I turned over and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling groggy. The air in the cabin felt stale, thick. I opened a window, letting the cool morning breeze wash over me, and tried to shake off the unease from the night before. I spent most of the day outside, hiking along the trails that wound through the forest. The scenery was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. More than once, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone behind me, but there was never anyone there. That night, I made sure to lock the door and double-check the windows. I told myself I was being stupid, that nothing was out there. I fell asleep faster this time, but it didn't last. A sound woke me up, something moving outside. I held my breath, listening. It was slow, deliberate. Footsteps. Not an animal. Not the wind. Someone was out there. I sat up in bed, heart hammering, straining to hear. The footsteps stopped right outside the cabin. Then silence. I waited. Minutes passed. Nothing. Finally, I convinced myself it had to be my imagination. Maybe a deer. Maybe my brain playing tricks on me. The next day, I searched around the cabin. The ground was hard-packed dirt, but near the edge of the trees, I saw them, footprints. Human footprints. My stomach dropped. I wasn't alone out here. I told myself it could have been an old trail. Maybe a hunter had passed through. But the prints were fresh. Someone had been standing outside my cabin in the middle of the night. I spent the day on edge, checking over my shoulder every few minutes. I thought about leaving, but I had come all this way. It was just paranoia. I locked up extra tight that night, pushing a chair under the doorknob. I kept the knife I brought for cooking next to my bed, just in case. At some point, I drifted off, but a noise snapped me awake. It wasn't outside this time. It was inside. A floorboard creaked in the darkness. I barely breathed. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Someone was in the cabin with me. My mouth went dry. I gripped the knife so hard my hand ached. I stayed frozen, listening. More creaking. Closer now. I couldn't take it anymore. I lunged out of bed, knife in hand, flicking on the flashlight I had left on the table. The room was empty, but the door was open. The chair I had wedged under the handle was pushed aside. I ran out of the cabin, my flashlight swinging wildly across the trees. I expected to see someone running, but there was nothing, just darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, I packed my things. I didn't care if I had paid for the whole week. I was done. I threw everything into the car and sped down that dirt road faster than I should have. I didn't relax until I saw the first signs of town. At the gas station, I told the guy behind the counter what happened. He just nodded like he had heard it before. "You were lucky," he said. "Some people don't make it out." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. I never went back to that cabin. I don't even like thinking about it. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is too quiet, I swear I hear those footsteps again. I didn't plan on staying at the cabin alone, but plans don't always work out. The original idea was simple. My brother and I would take a long weekend off work, drive up to the cabin, and spend some time in the woods, away from everything. No phones, no people, no stress. Just us, the lake, and the trees. But 2 days before we were supposed to leave, my brother called and said he couldn't make it. Work emergency. He told me we could reschedule, but I had already taken the time off, and honestly, I didn't want to wait. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. The cabin belonged to our uncle, but he lived out of state, and we were the only ones who ever really used it. I had been going there since I was a kid, and I knew the area well. It wasn't like I was going out into the wilderness completely blind. So I decided to go alone. I left early Friday morning. The drive was about 3 hours from my place, mostly highway, but the last stretch was a winding road through thick forest. That road always made me feel a little uneasy, not for any particular reason, just the way the trees pressed in close, blocking out the sky. It felt like a tunnel, like something was waiting on the other side. When I finally reached the cabin, it looked the same as always, small. Weathered wood, a stone chimney, a porch with an old rocking chair that creaked in the wind. I parked the car, grabbed my bag, and stepped inside. It smelled like wood and dust, the same way it always did after being closed up for a while. I spent the first couple of hours cleaning up. There was a thin layer of dust on the furniture and a few dead bugs in the corners. I swept, wiped everything down, and then unpacked. My plan was simple: hike during the day, read or write in the evenings, and just enjoy the quiet. The first night was uneventful. I built a small fire in the fireplace, ate some canned soup, and read until I felt tired. The forest outside was completely silent. I had always thought it was strange how quiet it got at night, like everything just stopped moving after dark. I locked the door before going to bed, more out of habit than any real concern. The cabin was in the middle of nowhere. No one ever came out there unless they had a reason to. But around 2 a.m., I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. The room was dark, the fire just a pile of dying embers. I listened for a moment, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. At first, I thought it was just the usual sounds of the forest, branches shifting, wind moving through the trees. But then I heard something else. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, crunching through the leaves just outside the cabin. I stayed completely still, listening. My first thought was that it was an animal, maybe a deer. But these weren't random, scuffling noises. They had a rhythm, a pattern, like someone was walking carefully, deliberately. I sat up, heart pounding. The sound stopped. I waited, barely breathing. For a long time, there was nothing, just silence. I told myself I had imagined it, that it was just my brain playing tricks on me. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, trying to slow my breathing. And then, after what felt like forever, the footsteps started again. Closer this time. I sat up fast, heart hammering. The only weapon I had was a hunting knife in my bag, and I grabbed it without thinking. My car keys were on the small table by the door, but the thought of going outside, of stepping into the dark with whatever was out there, made my skin crawl. I stayed frozen, listening. The footsteps stopped again. I waited, gripping the knife so hard my fingers hurt. Nothing. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Eventually, I convinced myself that it had to be an animal. Maybe a bear or a coyote. Something that had wandered too close and then moved on. I forced myself to lie back down, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, I went outside to check. The ground was damp from the night air, and there were tracks in the dirt. Human tracks, barefoot. I stared at them for a long time, my brain trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The prints were deep, clear. Someone had been standing just outside the cabin, less than 10 feet from my door. I thought about packing up and leaving right then, but part of me didn't want to overreact. Maybe some hiker had gotten lost and wandered near the cabin. It didn't make sense, but I tried to believe it. I spent the day hiking, trying to shake off the unease. I told myself it was fine, that I was just being paranoid. That night, I locked the door again and double-checked the windows. I kept the knife next to me. I was just starting to drift off when I heard it again. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. right outside the window. It was slow, steady. Someone standing just beyond the glass, breathing. I couldn't move, couldn't even think. My brain just locked up. The breathing went on for what felt like forever. Then a soft tap on the glass. Just once. Light, almost careful. I jumped out of bed and grabbed the knife. The tapping stopped. Silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there, knife in my hand, waiting for the sun to come up. When it finally did, I threw everything into my bag and got the hell out of there. As I drove away, I saw something in the rearview mirror. Something small, nailed to a tree just past the cabin. I slowed down just enough to get a better look. It was an old wooden carving. A face, no eyes, just a wide open mouth. And below it, scratched into the bark, were 4 words. See you next time. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. And I sure as hell won't be going back to that cabin again.